Hi, welcome to the stage, the moderator for this session, Hamish Mackenzie.
Thank you very much, Lucian. So whether you're starting your day, just finishing it, or somewhere in between, welcome. My name is Hamish Mackenzie, and thank you for joining us for this very special session, Adapting GxP Operations for Modern Compliance with Regeneron, sponsored today by HighByte. So first off, it'd be great if you can share with us in the chat who you are, where you are, who's always nice to get a feel for who's joining us. And while you're doing that, I'm going to just give you a few bits of housekeeping. As I'm sure you all know, this is an hour-long session. We'll be getting into the topic, introducing the guest speakers, of course, and we'll be getting lots of valuable insights from them. But we'll also leave some time for some questions from you, our audience, of course. So you should be able to see the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom window there. So please get your questions in. And we'll try and get to as many of them as we can at the end. These discussions always are very extensive, so we do run short of time sometimes, but we'll do our best, as I said. So if you've got a question, don't wait till the end. Get it in there as soon as you can think of it, and we'll try and get to it at the end, as I said. And just one very important point, all the content in this session represents the personal opinions of the participants. None of it constitutes legally valid advice. So with that said, we'll get into the topic. In GxP regulated environments, compliance is more than a box to check. I'm sure we'll all agree. It's a shared responsibility across IT, OT, and quality. And as manufacturers optimize operations and innovate, they have to still meet all the complexities of 21 CFR Part 11. And it is a bit of a paradox, but as we'll be discussing, and as I think our participants can prove, it's definitely a solvable challenge. And so in this context, our experts today are going to be talking about how to balance innovation with compliance in manufacturing. And we're going to be getting insights into some practical approaches, collaboration, and enabling technologies that make modernization auditable, governable, and scalable. And we're going to be also getting into some very technical weeds about topics such as CSA and CSV, connected data for compliance, partner ecosystems, and of course, real-world use cases. We always know that our audience love real world, and that's what Ron from Regeneron is going to be giving us some fantastic insight into that. All right, so let's introduce our speakers then. So we've got John Harrington, first of all. He's the Chief Product Officer at HighByte. He's focused on defining the company's business and product strategy, and his areas of responsibility include product management, customer success, partner success, and go-to-market strategy. Then we have Ron Sherrod, who is staff automation engineer at Regeneron. Ron is well-versed in process automation, having more than a decade of experience, specializing in integrating diverse vendor systems while ensuring secure, high-performance architectures. Then we have Joseph Iuliucci, who is principal at Interloopal. Joseph is an innovation engineer and technologist dedicated to helping organizations connect their operations with digital ecosystems to achieve creative and transformative outcomes. And we're going to be talking about some of those outcomes today. Finally, a few words about me. I am a former IDC analyst, and I've been running my consulting, advisory, and coaching practice from Munich, Germany since 2006. And I consult on multiple aspects of go-to-market strategy for a wide range of industrial technology companies, providing the focus, clarity, and execution leverage they need to turn complex technology into reliable growth. So that's us, that's your panel. Quick reminder, get your questions into the Q&A tool as soon as you think of them. And with that, let's get into it. I always like to start these sessions with a bit of context. And so I wanted to come to you first, Joseph, if I can. Can you talk a little bit about, especially this is going to be helpful for me as well, because I'm not a pharmaceuticals expert. So could you talk a little bit about why Title 21 was established originally, and what about Part 11 specifically? And then move on, as something I mentioned a moment ago, what's the difference between CSA and CSV in the context of what we're talking about here?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks very much. Appreciate being here. So as you mentioned, Hamish, I'll go into this. I won't go into it in the most detail. I expect a lot of our participants are, in this space. So Title 21, we're going to be quite focused on the U.S. in this conversation. That is a section of U.S. federal law that gives the Food and Drug Administration authority over products that affect public health, right? So it was really established from situations where there were products entering the market that had impacts on the citizens of the U.S. and Congress enacted Title 20 or voted in Title 21. So within Title 21, the Code of Federal Regulations, that are all there to establish safe, effective, and truthfully represented products. We have these subsections, and you'll hear them a lot. 210, 211, those are current good manufacturing practices. So that essentially apply to all drug manufacturers. 600 to 680 would be more of a focus on biologics. 820 is quality system or medical device regulation. And then, as you mentioned, Part 11. So it's pretty important to recognize that Part 11 was added later. Although the Food, Drug and Cosmetics Act established a lot of Title 21 in, I believe, the late 30s. It was updated in the late 70s to include medical devices. Part 11 was an overlay that was finalized in 1997 as we started seeing a lot of computerized systems being used to hold those records required under the law, under the regulation. And what it was intended to convey is how you would ensure that digital systems can be trusted like the paper systems. So you'll hear folks say predicate rules. So when you talk about Part 11, it is that you have decided as a business to create, maintain, control the set of records required under Title 21 using an electronic system. And that's really clear to delineate because you don't want to get in a space where you say Part 11 applies to everything. It does not apply to everything. It applies to systems of record for the predicate rules. Source data, we may get into, original data, we may get into, but in general, let's say it that way. So Title 21. Then we could see this as layers. You have 21 CFR, you have the guidance from the regulatory body, the FDA, then you have industry guidance, and then you have policies and procedures of regulated manufacturers. So you kind of see this layered set of governance and interpreting the law. So when we get into that conversation about CSV and CSA, computer system validation, computer software assurance, the underlying Code of Federal Regulations has not changed, but CSV might be seen as the more traditional architecture for ensuring that systems meet their intended use through the collection of objective evidence. So really honing in on objective evidence being part of the validation lifecycle, and assurance kind of shifting that language. This is hot off the press, right? September 2025, final guidance on CSA, recognizing that there had been a very documentation heavy approach to CSV. And this is some language shifting from the regulatory body. Okay, we would like to see folks really focus on the intended use of the software, use critical thinking, and really focus on the potential risk to patients. So if I quickly summarize that, Title 21 is the legal authority. The various parts apply depending on the manufacturer. And this law has not changed, but CSA, computer software assurance, represents kind of a modernization of the approach to collecting the evidence.
Okay, and I guess having patient impact as the focus has to be a good thing, right?
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about, I go back to what I said, Title 21 was established to keep us safe, right? To put humans in the middle. We say patient centric. So you'll hear a lot of the ideas that we talk about today, very much rooted in patient safety. As you're introducing new business capabilities, as you're talking about technologies, what impact would they have on the patient safety?
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. All right. That's brilliant as a bit of background and context for us. Thanks, Joseph. So Ron, from a manufacturer's perspective, what does this shift towards CSA signal from your perspective, and how do you approach it?
So as Joseph was saying, right, this is an evolution. It's an evolution from an old way of thinking into a new way of thinking. The law hasn't changed behind it, but how we approach ensuring patient safety, we're going to start looking at it a little bit differently, right? You're going to start putting the stresses and the risk where it really matters, right? and not necessarily over documenting as you start testing a lot of these systems and these platforms you want to roll out while you innovate. You're going to focus on, if I'm making a drug product, right? Like, what is critical to ensure the product I make is safe, right? And making sure you add the additional stresses there while focusing less on things like, well, what's this color, right? What's this color of this screen, right? You're not going to give weight to that as you would to, is my PID loop appropriate, right? If, my valve sees a certain thing, does it respond the appropriate way? That's where you're going to start to drive that overall risk-based approach to validation, right? And drive more critical thinking, less along the lines of like brute force following your standard operating procedures, and truly thinking about like, how does this change impact my patient that I'm eventually making my drug product for? And I think that's really what CSA is saying. Drive and evolve and think deeply about what you're doing and what it really means to your product down the line.
And so does that open up new opportunities then for you as a manufacturer in terms of what you're actually creating for patients?
Well, it allows you some platforms, right? Some of these more broader platforms like HighByte, broader industrial data ops platforms that have a plethora of things, right? As you start to see this IT OT convergence, everything being able to see all of these various functions, you can now focus on the functions that are critical, right? The functions that you're actually leveraging in these platforms that will actually impact patient safety. While saying, I'm not using this function is not important to patient safety, we're validating the box. It allows you to draw your assurance box a lot tighter and with more purpose in general. And that's where I feel like our ability to innovate is with this guidance, is that now I can say, this is how I draw my box. Yes, there's a lot of additional functionality in platforms like HighByte, but right, I'm only focusing on these, and that's where I'm going to put my stress to ensure my patients are safe.
Okay. And Joseph, what about you? How does this create opportunities, do you think, for regulators and manufacturers?
So for regulator, big thing here, right, is reducing risk to patients. So, if we take the long view, the FDA recognized that, over the course of 20 years, you could go back and read some warning letters that were issued to pharmaceutical manufacturers in the 2000s, and you would find the same observation in 2020, right? So we have this long arc of CSV where we're using computerized systems for creating, transmitting, storing, controlling data. And we can see some of the same observations showing up. And I think what that communicated to that organization was that, are we actually, controlling the risk? And in shifting towards CSV and starting to say, focus very primarily on intended use and kind of use these bifurcations. So does it have indirect or direct patient safety impact? Answer that question. And then what's the process risk if you're going high, medium, low process risk? And what you would see is a convergence, right? So if you were saying this has direct product quality or patient safety impact and high process risk, maybe it looks identical to CSV, and you're still generating those very kind of detailed test scripts and packages. But on the other side of that, it allows regulators to come in, show me a one-pager of all the systems that you're using and how you've assessed how they impact patient safety. And I only want to look at your ones that are, direct high process risk. It really allows people to focus where the risk exists. So that sort of from a regulatory standpoint, can come in, we can have inspectors come in, be much more efficient with the time that they have at each of these manufacturers.
Right.
And then, as Ron was mentioning, the flip side of that for manufacturers, you have this ability to really, and I don't want to understate it, this is a huge paradigm shift. So you have this opportunity that's going to be very challenging for kind of reskilling a workforce to get away from rote compliance into these critical thinking exercises. So if you can create that space, you can see a lot of these transformative technologies. If we want to get into cloud compute always comes up, very difficult to validate under traditional CSV. AI is another one. It's been done, but it's very challenging when you're talking about drug impact. We haven't really heard of that being validated under the previous model. So those are some opportunities for some transformative technologies.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. And John, Ron's already mentioned HighByte a couple of times. Could you talk a little bit, and we're going to get into the details of how customer solutions look and stuff later, but just at a relatively high level, could you talk a little bit about how platforms like HighByte support customers to take advantage of this shift towards CSA, that is?
Definitely, Hamish. First off, so to let everyone know who may not be familiar with HighByte, HighByte is as a company provides a software product that focuses on industrial data ops. It's a data ops solution, which is a low code to no code data integration platform. Okay, and why this is important, I thought it was really important. Like Joe talked about the nuance of risk when implementing systems within life sciences, and that every system, when you do that, then you don't have to interrogate and validate every system identically. You work with the systems as the risk profile changes. And Ron talked about testing what's important. And one of the things with Intelligence Hub, as Ron had said, it can be used for a lot of different use cases. But what we've done is enable our customers to package up each use case in what we call a data pipeline. So we can package up a data pipeline to integrate systems, and then you can test that or validate that or audit that to the level that you need, right? So it's not the entire system, it's that data pipeline. And this one we need to be very critically audit it and lock it down. And other ones maybe are less critical and need to be handled differently. So we've really focused on being very discrete in each data pipeline can live on its own. It's very portable, it's very testable and auditable, and it gives you the ability to really govern and control who has access to make changes, who has access to work with this data, as well as be able to monitor it. So we really focused on that new approach of it's not the global, it's much more focused.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you for that. So, all right, I think we've covered the background. Let's start getting into a bit more into the weeds. Having said that, I'm going to start off with a fairly risky question, which I think you could probably discuss for hours, but I'm going to pose it anyway to Joseph. Is compliant innovation an oxymoron in this context? And if not, why not? And yeah, try to keep your answer relatively brief.
Yeah, of course. I love the question. I see, Ron and John chuckling. Everybody kind of appreciates this question, right? Ron and I had been talking recently about what is innovation. That's the question that we always have to answer as individuals and as business. If we look at, 5 different manufacturers and 80% of their innovation portfolio is the same, like, do we consider that innovation? And, in the industry versus for a customer, right? So when we talk about innovation, we're talking about new ways to deliver value in your business. And we have to look at 2 customers, right? Internal and external customers. So those patients in the market for your finished product, and your internal customers, as Ron and I spend a lot of time working in automation, plant floor type automation, your users of those end systems. As John was mentioning, we have internal customers that are IT and quality, let's say. So is it an oxymoron? Of course, the answer is no. But I would consider compliance to be a constraint to apply gradually at the right time, of course. So we want to create environments within our businesses that can breed creativity, where we can make sure that people have the space to approach these problems that we would like to solve. But we don't apply that GxP compliance constraint too early, right? Because we also have to think that businesses, you know, you may have many organizations within your business that don't need to be compliant with Title 21. So you may come through your innovation funnel with some concepts, business capabilities that will not make it over the wall, as we say, into GxP, but they're still valuable to the business and maybe hugely valuable.
Okay. So that's a clear no then. And Ron, from your perspective, in terms of validation, obviously very important in this context. What are some of the challenges for you in your end user business as the more traditional approach to that?
I think Joseph touched on it earlier, right? There is an educational piece that has to occur as you start to move, as you start to evolve into this new CSA approach, right? That educational piece can't be looked past, because imagine if, you've had quality partners that you've worked with for the past 20, 25 years, and they've always done CSV, right? They said, we're going to do it like this, we're going to document heavy, and then you have new guidance that says, well, you can do it this way, right? It's you have to educate and bring people along the way as you start to innovate. Starting that conversation early with those quality partners does also help drive some of that innovation, because it ensures that the things you design as you're entering the funnel, right, they don't come out the other side of the funnel and you're ready to go to GxP, and then all of a sudden you have this huge burden that you haven't addressed, right? So that ability to go through these various like software development life cycles and being able to iterate swiftly with your quality partners will get you to a better point of innovation and able to roll out that innovation before it's obsolete, right? So I think that's really where I am as a drug manufacturer, like myself personally, where I think where our biggest challenges are coming as we move to a CSA environment and while still remaining compliant.
Okay. And Joseph, you mentioned, I think it was you, you mentioned intended use earlier. Could you just talk a little bit about that and why it's so important in terms of addressing compliance requirements?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's probably going to dovetail into something that I was going to tack on to what Ron mentioned as well. But and I want to contextualize this for many folks that have been working in or supporting life sciences for a long time. Like this is a breath of fresh air, right? We've seen this evolved CSV process that we've kind of asked ourselves many times, is this actually addressing the risk? Because as Ron mentioned, you do see a lot of very thorough testing of functions or features of the software that might be right out of the box, right? We're not changing the software. We purchased it, we're implementing it, and we're testing out of the box functions that have no impact to patient safety. So we want to really rein that back in. And that's where that intended use lens is so important. In that, again, if I bring up this analogy of if 5 end users are using the same off-the-shelf software, what are they using it for, right? So that's what you really want to focus on is this part of your quality system? Is this part of your production? And, are you creating records in the system? Are you transmitting them? Are you maintaining them? Those are the types of things that we really want to focus on. And from a CSA standpoint, I want to not conflate two things: business risk and patient risk, right? I want to be sure that we understand and we acknowledge that there are risks to a business, reputational being a huge one, right? That we're not trying to undercut, that each business has to right size their effort here. But from the regulatory body, they're saying what we want to see as evidence is very focused on potential risk to patient safety and the quality of your product. So it all starts from your intended use. You say, we're going to use this software for this use cases, as John mentioned. If you're using a platform like HighByte, you can isolate them to models and pipelines. That would be a great thing, right? You'd be very much bounding this use case has spawned these two pieces of digital infrastructure that are a model, a data model, and a pipeline. And we've determined that they are indirect and no process risk. So maybe what you're doing in that case is you're stepping through and you're verifying that this input data meets this, or this output data results from this input data, and you're doing ad hoc testing. These are all options under a newer CSA approach. Is the type of testing you're going to do is commensurate with risk as well.
Okay, and another kind of added layer of complexity, if you like, is the fact that we're not just talking about a single group of people, right? When it comes to the intersection between the technology and the service delivery, we've got OT, we've got IT, we've got quality assurance. So how do those relationships and this whole kind of right first time approach, how does that impact the innovation process as well?
So I think from my perspective, right first time, you asked if compliant innovation was an oxymoron. I would say the bigger challenge is potentially innovation in right first time environments. So of course, right first time, right every time, intended to communicate to those folks that are part of your operations. Like, we have a list of instructions, we will be following those instructions, and we have expected results of those instructions. And if we deviate from them, we have what is considered to be a quality event. And I think that right first time leads to some of the groups that you mentioned, OT, IT, so operational technology, information technology, and quality assurance, a quality unit typically being quality assurance and quality control, kind of having boundaries between them in that, OT and IT typically are services to your business, and your quality unit is your checks against your balances, right? And so I think it can create some more rigid boundaries, and that's Ron mentioned. You want to partner with these teams very early, but that right the first time, when you create an innovation space, it is critical that you give people the space and time to be creative, to create environments that are not right the first time for your innovation. And a joke we kind of talk about sometimes is like, you can't take somebody and say, we've seen that you're an early adopter and you like to solve problems. We'd like you to be part of our innovation team. You're going to innovate from 9 to 11. And you're going to do your day job all other hours of the day, right? That doesn't really work. And the joke that we make is, for the first hour, they're going to be thinking about the problem that they left. And for the second hour, they're going to be thinking about the problem they're going back to. So that right the first time environment is where you really want folks to operate pretty strictly by their instructions. You want these relationships that involve, tracking of all work in between those parts of the organization. But when you go over into this innovation space, creating a culture where, learn by mistake, right? Hugely important for that space. And hopefully Ron echoes that, and we work with John's product, so we love to make mistakes using that product.
But you have to
I want to
learn.
come on. Yeah, exactly. So Ron, I just wanted to ask you, so before we come on to more specifically about HighByte, do you feel like you have the freedom to create and innovate, or do you feel
I do believe
constraints?
No, I do believe I have the freedom to create and innovate, right? But I also understand the rules of the road in and out of a GxP space, right? And understanding those rules of the road in and outside the funnel does help me ensure that I bridge that gap as we do things in an innovative space and then bring them into a more rigid structure. So,
okay. Fantastic. All right, so we're about halfway through. Just a quick reminder, if you want to get any questions into the Q&A function, then please do that, and we'll try and get to a few of them at the end. So we've talked we've provided some context. We've talked about some of the challenges innovating within these constraints. I want to move on to talk about some solutions, and specifically about how Ron uses HighByte within the context of his role. But before we get to that, John, could you maybe just talk a little bit more about how a platform like HighByte rethinks that validation specifically that we were talking about, so that technologies can be enabled and deployed faster and in a smarter way?
Yes. I think it's important to actually start off with, how have people traditionally integrated systems?
Yeah.
So, in general, IT teams and I'll say OT teams as well, they've got these monolithic applications like a MES product or a LIMS product, and they want to bring it into the factory to help run the production. And what ends up happening is when you bring that in, you look at, well, what is the data that needs to be fed into this system, and what is the downstream systems that need access to this data? And then they often end up custom coding all of those connections. So each one of them, they'll have some software developers who will write code that'll integrate these systems together, and that'll be done for that system at that point in time. And then as things change over time, they go in and try and rewrite them or make adjustments or whatnot. And traditionally, that's very code centric. So you've got an application that's very application centric, but you've got all this code running to try to move the data around. And what we're talking about is taking that out of a code centric, putting it into the application centric world. So you have an application that does that integration. Because when you talk to a lot of these companies, the reality is they were spending, like, in some cases, 80% of the time writing that integration code and trying to maintain that integration code. And it turns out that when you're trying to validate things and audit things, the code is where a lot of the problems are. The applications can build tooling in to make the auditing, the validation much easier, which we've done with Intelligence Hub. But if you have all these pieces of code running on different servers and whatnot, that becomes very hard. That's where you pull all the agility out of it. So what we've really focused on is being able to provide a platform to integrate systems in like I said, a no code or low code environment where you can see and you can govern and you can secure that data, and it's auditable, it's testable, you can deploy multiple hubs as needed, and it's just a much more modern and composable environment where you can easily plug in systems and leverage that. And so it's really about being able to do that at scale. So that's where, by pulling it into an application, we can take a lot of the lower level code that's written and put that in the application. That way, if you just test that it works, then you're all done. You don't need to actually look into the code. So that's the advantage of an application.
Okay, and what you talked a little bit or mentioned just as scalability. So could you talk a little bit more about how specifically platform like HighByte helps with end user companies like Regeneron architect scalable solutions, but which are also compliant?
Yeah, the challenge with the manufacturing floor is you have lots of equipment, and a lot of this equipment was bought potentially at different times. There are some companies that have the advantage of creating a brand new factory, but in many cases, you've got equipment from different vendors purchased at different times.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we standardize that? And then you've got lots of applications. And so scale comes when you can have a standard platform for all of this, where you can see it, but you can also standardize that data and add context to that data. And then you can roll it out across different lines within a facility, or across different assets in a facility, across different lines, and then even across different facilities. But you have the same approach. So you're collecting the same data, you're landing it in the same systems, and you can do that really at scale and manage it through a common platform. It really dramatically reduces the effort.
Okay, fantastic. Well, let's test that theory then, or your description, and talk to Ron a little bit about how Regeneron leverages HighByte to adapt its GxP operations.
So, Regeneron is still on this journey of,
Mm-hmm.
Innovating with HighByte. And the way that I am sort of approaching this is that HighByte gives us a way to move John talks about, custom code, things like that. That's called GAMP5, right? That GAMP5 category of like doing something unique and then being able to test it in the end. Now you imagine I have all these GAMP5 connections connecting my ecosystem of the other applications that need this information to do their job, right? You end up with a spaghetti model, right? You end up with spaghetti everywhere, right? And what HighByte does is it allows you to get down to a more unified event-based architecture, right? Where you have the ability to say, I don't need spaghetti and custom integrations between each individual thing to get my data around. I can say, I can work with HighByte, slide down more to like a GAMP4, which is more configurable, configure things in HighByte, and then really democratize that data, right? And so the democratizing that data, now I know that my other systems that need that to make their decisions around patient quality have the same data at the same time at the moment that it occurs. It allows for a more contemporaneous environment where data coming up from the shop floor that is needed to make batch release decisions is there and available, right? And I don't have to worry about this individual connection necessarily breaking between a custom application on the plant floor and then bringing it up to something like an MES or something that operates at a higher level. And so that's where really HighByte sits in the middle as that really single point to aggregate, generate data products that then solve the solutions of the other people on the other side, the consumers of my published data from the shop floor.
Okay, and does that ring true for you, John? I mean, obviously you work with a lot of different companies in lots of different industries. Is this?
Absolutely. And once you start building those pipelines, then all of a sudden you can also, there may be some other teams that want access to that data as well. So we have some data the data is going into the MES system, but at the same time, maybe we want to start pulling it off and making it available to other people or other systems that need access to it. And that gets even easier, right? It's not redeveloping it or now it's just adding another target for that data and making that. Ron talked about democratizing the data, making the data available. The key is get people access to the data that they need. We're living in a data world, a data-centric world, and people want more information. In the past, they just haven't been able to get it. So now we're really unlocking that data.
Okay. One thing that's coming out to me very strongly is the collaborative nature of this whole piece. So I don't know who wants to maybe talk about this first, maybe Joseph. When we think about working groups, partner networks, how do those kind of relationships accelerate innovation in this context?
I can try to tackle that one. I mean, I'm big on the creativity piece, right? So I think that working groups and partner networks really kind of reveal to folks that we're not alone in the problems we're trying to solve. We can look across industry. If you've truly created an innovation space that is safe, that is isolated from your GxP operations, like why not look at other industries to see what they're doing, right? Like get out there, see what technologies are in the stack if you can figure that out, and make some friends and have some fun seeing these solutions in action, and then figure out, we have a problem. I don't want to do the hammer and nail thing, but just be inventive, and you get a lot of that through connecting with folks like John and his team, and with Ron and the team at Regeneron. Is those diverse perspectives really make you much stronger as you're looking at a problem set, right? So that's a big thing for me. I think with partner networks, and partner is kind of a pretty broad term, but if I was gonna work with John and the HighByte team, and I think this is one of the questions that's come up, is when you're looking at CSA and you're looking at the evidence that you're going to be collating to prove that you're assuring you're controlling your risk. Some of that can come from your vendor, right? And it's not a total shift to your vendor. That's not the purpose, but the intention is that if you would like to work with a software provider like HighByte, you would typically do some sort of quality audit of of John and his team and say, how do you determine what features are going into your product? How do you code your product? How do you verify your product? Then you get to release, right? And so if you're going and forming that relationship, what you're starting to do, and Ron mentioned this very quickly, and it should probably come back around, is you have a funnel and you have a software development lifecycle. And you're trying to say that as I'm doing this planning, conceptualizing, designing my use cases, my business capabilities, and my technological capabilities, I see that a vendor like HighByte is very strong in this space. We can leverage their evidence. So that's what it's coming down to, is like, you want a partner network where, you can see that they have quality practices, in the products they're releasing, and that helps you share that evidence as an end user. And to be very clear, like, if we're talking HighByte and Regeneron, like, Regeneron is required to comply with 21 CFR, right? HighByte is not, but those are quality software development practices that we want to leverage. And back to the working groups thing, ISPE, Society of Pharmaceutical Engineering, or Engineers, that's a big one. It's always been very active. They produce the guidance, GAMP, Good Automated Manufacturing Practices, that Ron mentioned. Being part of these groups is hugely valuable. You get to, again, have some conversations about problems that people are seeing and solutions they've tried. Going to industry conferences or trade shows, those can always get you out of your day-to-day and breed some creativity.
Fantastic. Okay. We touched on it a couple of times. We've not really looked at it specifically. What about the IT, OT, differing perspectives on utilizing platforms like HighByte? And how do both those worlds, and we're always talking about how they need to come closer together, but how do they both extract the most value from these kind of platforms? I don't know if, John, if you want to start, and then Joseph and Ron can talk about it as well.
It's, with all of our manufacturing customers, we always say that you won't have success unless you bring IT and OT together. I will say, of course, with life sciences, it's got to be IT, OT, and QA, right? So, so quality is like the third leg of the stool. But the challenge is that in the past, there hasn't been systems to really bring those teams together. There's network cable, but that's about it. There's firewalls that actually are designed to keep them apart. There's no systems to bring them together. And, fundamentally, OT is thinking about technology like telemetry and time series data. And IT thinks about SQL databases and REST APIs and cloud systems. And so, they generally just are working in these different worlds. However, the key is we need to bring them together, give them a platform they can work in, give them a platform that they can share data across those systems in those environments. And then, ultimately, they both want the business to succeed. So I always think if you bring them together, you get them talking, you give them a platform where they can interact, where IT can say, this is the data that I need, this is how I deploy systems and manage and maintain them. And OT can say, well, this is what this data means, and this is where we can send it to, your target systems. And that's really what a data ops platform does. It brings those three teams together and gives them a single platform where they can move data across their environments, across their networks. I think that it's really kind of, now we've got the application that brings them together. In the past, we didn't really have that. It was very separate. So I think it becomes very powerful.
And Ron, from an end user perspective, do you see those silos breaking down a bit in Regeneron or elsewhere?
They have to. They have to. I think John touched on it earlier. You're starting in a knowledge-based economy, right? Your OT systems are Your OT systems are the ones that are making the drug product, like from a Regeneron perspective. They're the ones making the product. They're the ones controlling, ensuring patient safety, right? But that information that they produce and generate and gets pushed up to that IT system. That IT system, you're making broader overall decisions, right? And so as it pushes up, you have to have something in the middle because they have to be able to work together, especially as we start to enable other things, right? That operate at a higher level to give us the ability to move faster, swifter, and make decisions easier. Some of these other high level applications, the OT must be able to make that available. And through systems like HighByte, right? With event-based architectures and things like that, that data is now exposed to those higher level systems, right? We have to drive an efficiency, right? Especially when you're trying to reach more patients, right? Make more product, right? You have to drive that efficiency. And the only way to do that is to get the data to the consumers that really need it to make those higher level decisions.
And just to build on what Ron said, one of the things that we're seeing in the last 10 years is the desire for the rest of the business to get access to data from the factory floor. So traditionally, the OT team is on the factory floor. They're running the machinery. They're focused on getting product out the door, and they have systems to do that. The quality team in general didn't really have access to the data being produced. The product quality team, not the IT quality team, but the product quality team didn't have access to that data. The R&D team didn't have access to that data. The supply chain team didn't have access to that data. The maintenance team or the team that's looking at power consumption or whatever is going on in the business never had access to that data. And now we're just seeing this thirst for, wow, if I could have this information, what could I do with it, right? That's part of the innovation. What could I do if I could have access to real-time information coming off all of our machines at once? And that gets combined with my CMMS system or my LIMS system or my MES system data. Now I could do phenomenal things. So it's really about IT is effectively it's a service organization for the rest of the business, providing applications and technology to the rest of the business. And that's where the thirst even starts.
Right. And we're going to come on in the final section to talk a bit more about that business value that's then made possible through that data access. Before we do that, or generally in this last section, we want to try and get a little bit practical. So I guess specifically Joseph and Ron to begin with, could you talk a little bit about how boxing bounding applications based on intended use that we were talking about easier makes the validation process easier, but also how we then move on from simply I know it's not simple, but validation more towards focusing on those business outcomes from a project-based by taking a project-based approach. So I don't know, maybe Joseph, you want to start, and we get Ron's perspective as well.
Sure, I'd love to. So we'll kind of combine a few of those ideas and
Yeah,
maybe a little
that would be
bit
great.
of a reverse order. So if we're being
Okay.
practical for some advice for folks out there who are trying to
Exactly.
build an innovation portfolio, and that's a key word, right? Let's talk about portfolio. So what I would encourage folks to do is to start with problem-based innovation or problem-based learning. So you're essentially saying we have collected some problems from throughout our business. They've made it up to leadership. Leadership says, yes, we agree on these 10, let's say, as an example, and spin off some teams that do some problem-based innovation. And what that means is really that that approach to discovery, allow that team to really go in and understand the pain points, understand the constraints, before you commit all the resources in project-based, right? So in problem-based, have teams deeply research the problem, understand the framework, and then propose a solution that can be a fairly, lofty solution, maybe quite difficult to implement. But you're starting building a portfolio from that problem-based approach. They're called messy problems a lot of times, right? So there's a lot of information that goes into contextualizing the problem. And don't seed those teams with too much information. Let them discover, let them go talk to end users. And, we thought it was this, it actually sounds more like it's this. Then when you kind of, as you narrow, right, you want to look at, okay, which of these can actually be turned into projects? And that's where you're starting to talk a little bit more, as you asked Hamish, about value. So those are the ones that you see and you say, hey, we've had problem-based teams go in, they've done a lot of research on this, and we see a business capability that needs to be changed, introduced, or transformed, let's say. How are we going to do that? Well, maybe it's a process. Maybe it's just an existing process that needs a redesign and it hasn't been redesigned in years. That's still an innovation. Maybe it requires a new technology, and that's where you're talking about, maybe to go look out there and see what other folks are doing or what's available. But that is where you're starting to shape that return on investment for that style of project-based innovation. But it all comes down to when you're getting into that project space, you're able to say that you have an intended use because you've gathered the information about your problem. You're able to clearly state this is the problem we're trying to solve. You should be able to state what systems, what groups, what procedures, policies that you may impact. And that's how you're going to shape that CSA effort, that validation effort, is by working directly from that intended use in those impacted systems, and obviously keeping the patient safety at the core. So that's
Fantastic.
That's a big one there.
Yeah, it's a big topic, and we're running out of time, unfortunately. But so thank you for kind of bringing it all together there with my clumsy introduction. Ron, could you maybe just talk a little bit about how that actually looks, in a real organizational context in Regeneron?
More like, so along those lines, right? For every organization, like where that value is different, right? Like for Regeneron, it's one way. For another company, it might be something else. And the ability to determine that value, you have to work with your internal customers and your external customers, right? To ensure that you're solving that problem, like Joseph was talking about. If you have a problem, right? And then you're presenting a solution or a selection of solutions to allow those leaders to really make a decision of, this is the value, that this is how we want to capture this value, right? Because like I've been saying, right, HighByte is a platform. You can, even just looking within HighByte, right, there are multiple ways to solve the same problem, right? Whether you decide to go model heavy, whether you decide to go pipeline heavy, right, and then let something else model, right? There are multiple ways to do that. So it's very, very organizationally dependent on how that value is found. I have typically looked at it as in like, how am I allowing someone to do their job more efficiently, right? Like, how am I allowing someone to be better at their role to ensure patient safety? And there's a plethora of things that an individual in our organization needs to do to be successful in ensuring that our patients are safe for the drugs that we're making. And I know we're running out of time, so I tried to be brief.
Yeah, no, that's
Yeah.
fantastic. Because that's a very clear definition of how you measure value in the context of everything you're doing. So I think that's great. And John, from a HighByte perspective, obviously you prove your value in terms of the business value ultimately, not just the capability of the technology, but what it actually enables. So could you just talk about how that looks how the value piece looks from your perspective?
Yes. So Joe talked about, you start with the project, right? Or you start with a problem. I need to solve this. Could be my packaging line is not running fast enough. It could be the drug quality is not good enough. It could be when we're having a lot of scrap. It could be that we're not collecting the data properly. Whatever the problem is, most companies have many problems that they'd love to solve. Right. And when you get down into the individuals within the company, they themselves have many problems that they love to solve. The challenge is the cost of solving them, especially in the traditional validated systems environment of CSV, was just, it was overbearing. And so they would just punt on all of the small things, and they would really only do the really big things. And now what we're seeing is, with the new CSA approach and with new platforms like HighByte, they can attack multiple of those problems and they can solve them much faster. Because what you find, what a number of studies have found over the last 5 years, is that the majority of the time, especially in life sciences, the majority of the time to bring on a new system is not configuring the new system. It's the integration piece and the validation piece, and then the maintenance piece. So if we can dramatically reduce the time for innovation, the time for maintenance, and the time for validation, then we can do a lot more projects. We can get far more innovative, and that in itself delivers the value to the company. So by making the OT and IT and QA teams so much more efficient and effective with their time, they can do a lot more projects, and that's where the value comes to the company.
Fantastic. Okay. So we are running out of time, unfortunately. So and I did promise we'd try to go to a couple of questions. So that's what we're going to do now. So I have one here from Joe. I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly. Ziffer or Cypher. John, could you just talk quickly about the audit capability in the HighByte model and how that can be enabled or disabled per pipeline, per model, just at a very high level?
Yeah, so we have an audit log. You can turn it on, and whenever any configuration change is made, that gets logged. It gets logged into a database, and that data is then available. First off, you can constrain who can make changes to the system. Then you have that audit capability. Then when you're testing your pipelines, you can see, so a data pipeline, we have to pull some data from one or multiple systems. We have to transform it in some way. We want to model it or structure it, add context, and then deliver it to the target system. The ability to see, so there's a series of steps that need to occur. The ability to see the data as it came in and transformed, it enables you to really closely verify exactly what's happening. And then you've got this data pipeline, which can then be secured and audited, so that if it ever changes, you can see exactly who did it, when they did it. Of course, they had to have permission to do it, but it's very easy to set up and enable. So if there's more questions, happy to take that one offline. Just reach out on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Okay. There's one question here. I'm not completely sure who it should go to, but I'll ask it anyway. It's from Darina. It appears that risks are being shifted to suppliers. How many suppliers can provide a proper quality and system check? Is that clear what that means?
I think I can probably take that a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't personally feel that the risk is shifting to suppliers. We are trying to challenge our suppliers, I feel, more to show us from a burden of proof that the product that they are producing was produced with a quality mindset, right? And when I say that quality, it's not necessarily like I'm making a drug product and I have like quality in the product that it is pure. It's more of a quality is that you're following a set of systems to when you do have an issue with your product, you are making informed decisions and you are following a procedure to remedy that issue, right? When I step into some way of evaluating a product and understanding their software development lifecycle, I want to know that if an issue arises, you have the ability to rapidly patch in the process to get to that patch that you take, right? That you are calculated and methodical in how you get to a solution, right? Because as Joseph said earlier, the burden of making quality products for me as a manufacturer is on me. I have to ensure that whether I'm getting raw materials or computer software system, that they ensure I can still meet that burden of quality I have to my external patients.
And I think
Oh,
the
yeah.
extension of that statement that was in the question, right, is if you're electing to use a software that the supplier does not have good quality practices, then you must absorb that, right? You must demonstrate more evidence collected against a commercial off-the-shelf software because the provider of that software may not have evidence that you can leverage.
All right. Brilliant. Well, unfortunately, we have run out of time. As always the case with these sessions, they always go into a lot of depth. So it all just remains for me to say thank you very, very much to our panelists. Thank you for your great insights. I hope everybody feels it was a great discussion. Thanks especially to HighByte. Without you, these sessions don't, sponsors like yourselves, these sessions don't happen. So obviously, we're very, very grateful for your support. Thank you, obviously, to our audience as well and your questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them, but we will provide a mechanism to get those questions answered if you need any more information. Thank you very much for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Hamish. Thanks, Ron and Joe. It's great.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.